There are places in this world where nightmares are born, not in the mind, but in reality, where evil isn't a shadowy figure lurking in the dark, but something real, something walking among us. Wichita, Kansas, a quiet city resting in the heart of America, a place where life moved slowly, where doors were left unlocked and no one ever thought to be afraid, but darkness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, unnoticed, until it's too late. December 2000. Two strangers arrived in town, two brothers, two predators, Reginald and Jonathan Carr, a pair of wandering ghosts, drifting from city to city, leaving behind nothing but destruction. Wichita didn't know them, had no reason to fear them, but that would change, because they weren't looking for money or revenge. They were looking for something far worse. And on the night of December 14th, they found it. 5 friends sat together in a small house on Birchwood Drive. 5 young lives full of dreams and promise. Jason Befort, a teacher, a man with a future, newly engaged. Brad Haker, a man who worked hard, loved harder, and never thought of evil. Aaron Sander, a kind soul, soft-spoken, trusting. Heather Mueller, a talented preschool teacher with a heart bigger than the sky. And Holly G. Jason's girlfriend, a fighter, though she didn't know it yet. It was just another night, just another evening spent together, laughing, talking, feeling safe, until the door opened, until the nightmare walked in. The door bursts open. The Carr brothers step inside, guns drawn, eyes cold. What follows is not just a robbery. It is a campaign of terror. Fear took hold instantly. Hands were raised, questions were asked, but there were no answers, because the brothers didn't need a reason. They didn't want a reason. They wanted control. They wanted power. They wanted to see what it felt like to strip a person down to nothing and then destroy them. One by one, they were bound, thrown to the floor. The night stretched on, twisted, cruel, endless. The brothers weren't in a hurry. They had time, and they wanted to make it last. They played with them, made them do unspeakable things to each other, laughed at their pain. They took pleasure in watching innocents die. And when they had their fill, when they had wrung every last drop of suffering from their captives, they loaded them into Jason's truck. The victims didn't know where they were going, but they knew what waited for them. And they were right. Across Wichita, the brothers drive their captives from ATM to ATM, forcing them to drain their accounts. The victims comply, hoping that obedience will save their lives. But it won't, because the Carr brothers never planned to let them go. The truck stopped in the middle of nowhere, a frozen field, a silent graveyard waiting to be filled. One by one, they were forced to kneel in the snow. The Carr brothers didn't speak, didn't hesitate, didn't care. Five lives, 5 futures, stolen. But they made one mistake. They didn't check for movement. Holly was still alive. She lay still, unmoving, pretending to be dead. And when the killers were gone, she crawled. She didn't know how far she had to go, only that she couldn't stop. She reached a house, pounded on the door, and when the terrified homeowner opened it, she whispered the words that would change everything. "Help me." Holly's escape shattered the Carr brothers' illusion of the perfect crime. Within days, they were caught, arrested. In the courtroom, they laughed, smirked, showed no remorse, but justice was swift. They were convicted, sentenced to death. Even so, the scars they left behind could never be erased. Wichita would never forget. Wichita was never the same. A city once seen as safe, now haunted by the memory of that night. Security tightened, doors locked earlier. People looked over their shoulders. The families would never heal. And Holly, she survived, but a part of her remained frozen in that field, in that house, in that nightmare. Evil does not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it walks beside us, hidden, waiting. Wichita learned this lesson the hard way, a lesson written in blood, in terror, and in the cold silence of a snowy Kansas night. There are places where the past refuses to die, where the walls remember screams and the earth hides secrets, where the air itself feels thick with the weight of tragedy, as if it too is unwilling to let go. Tonight, we return to one of the darkest corners of history, a farmhouse lost to time, a family erased, a killer who walked among them. This is the story of Hinterkaifeck. 1922. The Gruber family, Andreas, 63, a grizzled farmer hardened by years of solitude, his wife, Cecilia, 72, frail but sharp-eyed, their daughter, Victoria, 35, with her 2 young children, Cecilia, 7, and Joseph, just 2. And the new maid, Maria, 44, who had been hired only days before the horrors would unfold. They lived far from the nearest neighbor, hidden deep in the forests of rural Germany. A place of peace, they hoped, but what they didn't know was that their farm was a prison of paranoia. Days before the murders, Andreas began to notice odd things, footprints leading to the house but none leading away. The barn door had been tampered with. Keys went missing, disappearing into thin air. Newspapers arrived every day, but he hadn't ordered them. And worst of all, strange scratching noises came from the attic, low, deliberate, like something was hiding, waiting. March 31st. The family settled into bed, unaware that their killer had already entered their home. Some say he'd been hiding there for days, observing, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment to strike. But when he did, it was swift. It was brutal. Andreas and Cecilia were the first to die, dragged from their beds in the dead of night, their skulls crushed by the mattock that would become the killer's weapon of choice. Then Victoria fought. Her screams echoed through the house as she clawed at the walls in desperation. But even her struggle couldn't save her children. Little Joseph, only 2, was found lifeless in his crib. Cecilia, the youngest, managed to flee to the barn, but there too death found her. The killer's mattock fell again and again. And in the most horrific twist, young Cecilia didn't die immediately. She lived, trapped beneath the cold, lifeless bodies of her family. Her final moments were spent in sheer terror, her fingers pulling out her own hair, trying to escape the nightmare that had become her reality. 4 days passed, 4 days of silence. No one came. No one noticed that the Grubers hadn't been seen in days, and the killer, still within their home, carried on as if nothing had happened. He fed the cows, milked the goats, sat at their dinner table, slept in their beds. The very place where life had once flourished now became the killer's sanctuary. When the neighbors finally came, they discovered the barn, and what they found was beyond description. 6 bodies, stripped of their clothes, stacked like firewood, blood staining the earth beneath them. But the killer left them a message, unseen at first, until a closer look revealed it. A child's handprint, but Cecilia's hands were clean. Had the killer left it as a message, mocking them from beyond the grave? Or was there another victim? Someone whose identity the killer wanted to erase completely? The investigation began, and yet it spiraled into confusion and suspicion. There were no solid leads, only theories and shadows. Some pointed to Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a local man who had a strange obsession with Victoria. He believed her son, Joseph, was his own, though DNA tests later proved the child was Andreas's. But the rage he felt was no less potent. Did Lawrence, driven by twisted desires, snap? Did he kill to silence his suspicions? Then there was Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. Declared dead after World War I, his body never found. Did he return from the dead to seek revenge for his wife's betrayal? Or was he always alive, watching from the shadows? But despite every theory, the killer remained a ghost. Theories, suspicions, but no answers. Hinterkaifeck was a riddle that could not be solved. To this day, Hinterkaifeck continues to haunt. Those brave enough to visit the site have reported strange occurrences, voices whispering on the wind, the sound of footsteps where no one walks, and the unmistakable smell of blood lingering in the air. The past refuses to die here. The killer, though long gone, still walks among us in the shadows. The echoes of that dark night still call, reminding us that some horrors never truly fade. Florence, Italy, a city celebrated for its art, its history, its romance. But beneath its sunlit vineyards and Renaissance charm lies a darkness that has never fully faded. A shadow that crept through moonlit fields, stalked lonely lovers' lanes, and left behind a trail of blood and unanswered questions. This is the story of Il Mostro di Firenze, the Monster of Florence. It began on a quiet summer night in 1968. A young boy named Natalino slept soundly in the back seat of a car, unaware that his world was about to shatter. When he awoke, his mother and her lover lay dead, riddled with bullets, their blood staining the upholstery. Natalino fled into the night, screaming for help. But the killer, he was already gone, vanished like a ghost. The police pinned the crime on Natalino's father, Stefano Mele, a jealous husband, they claimed. But 6 years later, another couple fell victim, Stefania Pettini and Pasquale Gentilcore, shot in their car on a secluded road. And this time, the killer left something behind, a signature, a message. The same .22 caliber bullets, and a rage that defied reason. Stefania's body was dragged into the dirt, her face, her neck, her chest, slashed relentlessly. A grapevine stalk left in place of what he took. The police knew then. This was no crime of passion. This was something inhuman. For over a decade, the monster hunted. Young couples, whispering sweet nothings in parked cars, never suspecting the figure watching from the trees. A click of a safety, a flash of muzzle fire, and then the screams. In 1981, he returned, Carmela De Nuccio and Giovanni Foghi, their bodies found in a pool of blood. But Carmela, she was missing something, a piece of her flesh, carved out with surgical precision. The monster's trophy, his proof that he could never be caught. The killings grew bolder, more gruesome. In 1984, Pia Rontini and Claudio Stefanacci parked near a quiet vineyard. Hours later, Pia's left breast and pelvis were gone. The killer left her mutilated corpse posed like a macabre doll, and then he wrote to the police, a letter taunting them, a challenge: find the bodies. But the monster's arrogance was his undoing. In 1985, he claimed his final victims, 2 tourists, Nadine Morio and Jean-Michel Kravaishvili. This time, he sent a package to the prosecutor, a scrap of Nadine's flesh, a sickening souvenir, and with it, a promise. This is the last, for now. The police scrambled. Suspects piled up. A madman named Pietro Pacciani, convicted of butchering his own daughters. Two accomplices, Vani and Lottie, locked away despite flimsy evidence. But whispers lingered, of satanic cults, of rituals performed under Tuscan moonlight, a stone pyramid in the woods, a villa where screams echoed through the night. Decades later, the Monster of Florence remains an enigma. His case, one of Italy's longest and most confounding, remains unsolved. The killings stopped, but the terror he sowed never truly faded. Even now, when the sun sets over Florence, when lovers retreat into the countryside for a quiet moment alone, a question lingers in the dark. Did the monster simply disappear, or is he still watching, waiting, ready to strike again?